Hello again, everybody. We're now on Module 9 of the human being spectrum, working with adolescents on the autistic part of the human being spectrum. The topics we're going to cover are: how do adolescent brains operate? Which is a very good question. All of us who've had adolescents in our families as parents have asked that question. And the differences in male and female presentations in adolescence for those on the autistic part of the human being spectrum. The transition to secondary school, which is a big event in anybody's life, and what can we do to help people at that stage in their life who have got a diagnosis or who suffer from high levels of anxiety, because I think there are many adolescents who suffer from high levels of anxiety. They're not necessarily on the autistic part of the human being spectrum. So let's look at the general overview of adolescent brains and how they operate. We now know a lot more about adolescent brains because of MRI scans, which is an amazingly valuable resource. And we were all teenagers at one time, and so we can all recall those years and some of the things that we did. I can, with embarrassment. Research shows that new wiring occurs rapidly in the teenage brain, mainly in the emotional areas of the brain, and that leads to an imbalance between emotional and rational areas in the brain. I think we can all relate to that. We've all experienced that. And adolescents can make rational judgments and choices in emotionally neutral situations, but they may become emotionally charged around attempts by parents, teachers, or authority figures to maintain or gain control over them. There's a lot of rebellion over small and larger things. This emotionally charges their body chemistry, and with more cortisol and adrenaline whizzing around their nervous system. So adolescent brains are more likely to take risks and are attracted to risk-taking. So how do they operate? Well, there's the risk-taking aspect. Adolescent risk-taking activities and choices can lead to traumatic injuries. I have come across this and I've read things in the papers or heard things on the news about this. So we're all aware that adolescents can do really silly, dangerous things. And so when you're emotionally charged, if you remember those sort of disconnections, or the disconnection that takes place between the rational brain and the emotional brain, when people are highly charged emotionally or highly anxious, they literally shut down from their rational brain and become stupid, if you remember. And their amygdala becomes highly activated and hijacks the activity of their brain. And so when you're emotionally charged, you don't care about yourself so much. You don't care about what you eat, how much you drink, the impacts of drugs or alcohol, and early sexual activity. The more parental arguments are, the more attractive sometimes these activities become. In social activity, socializing in peer groups can result in stress and irrational behavior. I know that bullying can take place in secondary schools. Schools can have an anti-bullying policy, but what with the social media and other ways of connecting with one another in the world of adolescence, bullying is a subtle thing and can be easily unseen by the adults in charge, but it can be very damaging and stressful indeed. And adolescents do stupid things in order to seek status in their peer group. They push boundaries to be accepted by their peers, and it's this pressure to fit in. how do you look? I mean, I can talk, but it goes to an extreme. How you look, your hairstyle, the clothes you wear, your mobile phone, what sort of mobile phone, is it acceptable? Is it socially acceptable? Or is it something somebody will make fun of? Um, and as I mentioned before, the huge impact of social media. And it's a sophisticated jungle out there. Remember, the human brain is set up to survive in the jungle and on the savannah, and the scenery has changed, but the risks are still there, and they still create high levels of anxiety and patterns of behavior that involve, as I said, risk taking and doing silly things, and incredible stress and pressure. So, uh, in that sophisticated jungle, just like in any jungle, there are winners and losers in terms of emotional health and self-esteem. So, adolescence on the autistic spectrum part of the human being spectrum, it's very complex and very pressured. And being a teenager on the autistic part of the human being spectrum is a double whammy. It really is. Younger autistic spectrum children can scrape through primary school, sometimes without being recognised at all. But transition to secondary school is very stressful for all children. It's a huge change in your life. It's more than a rite of passage. It is, will you survive or not? How well will you cope with the pressures? So some able children on the autistic part of the HBS, especially girls who are very good at masking their difficulties, may not be recognised until this transition, or may not be recognised at all. There used to be a strong bias that there were more males to females identified with the AS type of human being spectrum brain. But the classic little professor type, identified by Hans Asperger, ignores the equally geeky, socially shy, and socially awkward and confused female autistic spectrum type. Let's look at the male versus female traits. We've got a female space person and a male space person now, because it is spread more evenly, I think, across the human being spectrum. So it's reported that the male brain, this is some work that was done in the late 90s, early new millennium, that the male brain is a systemizing brain, while the female brain is an empathizing brain. But this is much more fluid, we realise now. Women scientists, women in IT, women with very, very logical brains who are on the spectrum, but maybe they're not identified as such. What happens is they're usually extremely perfectionist and extremely keen on doing a good job, and we'll talk about that later, and they don't show up so much. So it is increasingly recognised that while girls can mask their autistic spectrum traits, because they have an innate ability to cooperate and socialise, they still suffer from many or all of the anxieties and autistic spectrum traits seen in boys. And if we go back to people, the human brain being set up to survive in the jungle and on the savannah, you can see why the females of that type of brain would be innately more able to cooperate, because the females, presumably, it makes a lot of sense, and it seems to have been carried down the centuries, were more primed to look after the young and keep the, bear the young and look after the young and make sure they survive. And they needed to do this, and they needed to cooperate with other females in order to do this. So their brains were sort of primed to cooperate and get on with others and help others and empathise with others. Whereas the male brain is more competitive, going out there and seeing how much meat it could capture, and just making that up. But I think that might have been the case. So on a generalised level, males tend to be more competitive and less empathetic. But that is a very general thing. There are absolutely lovely, gentle men, empathetic men out there who are not competitive. So it is a generalisation. So let's look at the transition to secondary school. Most teenagers find secondary school a social minefield, and this part of growing up can produce anxiety, depression, eating disorders, general non-compliance with accepted familial and societal expectations. You see this right across the board, not with every adolescent, but with quite a few. And they can appear defiant, depressed, anxious, and self-destructive, sadly. And some of them are definitely autistic spectrum, but others are not, because adolescence brings its own difficulties because of what's happening in the brain and body chemistry, the hormonal changes. So teenagers with an autistic spectrum diagnosis do find transition to secondary school a nightmare of stress, confusion, a sense of isolation and unhappiness, because it is a huge change, and one of the features of autistic spectrum is inability to cope with change and lack of flexibility, and obviously also social communication and socializing with others, making friends and keeping friends. So what can we do to help? And this is for parents and teachers. So our main driver is to survive. So our brains, we now know, and this is a great relief, is highly plastic. We talked about that in the previous module. And we can learn new skills and behaviours through recognising the need and learning new skills. So understanding the adolescent brain and that their behaviour is not personal to you, that sometimes the things that are said and done seem very personal, but it would help us, those who are dealing with it, to diffuse the situation, because we don't have to engage in sort of personal comments and refusals for compliance as a personal thing. It is something that's happening in their brain. It's a normal thing. It's very hard to deal with, but it's not personal. And it will help to be non-judgmental and not use phrases like, why can't you? And you should. And for God's sake, can't you understand? Don't use phrases like that if you can possibly avoid it, because all it does is excite their emotional brain even more, cause their amygdala to go on high alert and pump out cortisol, and all you'll get is a lot of emotional stuff back, which is not what we really want. We want them to be able to be calmer. So what we need to do is actively listen, just listen, however unreasonable what they're saying seems to you. It's really important to just listen and remain calm. It's not personal, it's their stuff. And reflect back to them what they said in a neutral tone. So you're telling me that when I asked you to tidy up your bedroom this morning, you felt that I was being really bossy. Is that right? Yes. Okay, I get that you thought I was being really bossy, and I'm really sorry that I came across as bossy, but it would really be helpful for you if your room was a bit tidier, and if you need some help doing it, I will help you. I don't need help. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that you don't need help, because I know you can do a good job. So when you have time, it would be absolutely great if you could tidy your room. And the choice is, well, you can choose to not tidy your room, and I will have to remove your Xbox from your room, or you can choose to tidy your room and keep your Xbox. It's up to you. It's your choice. Okay. So what can schools do to help? They can raise staff awareness that some pupils transitioning from primary schools are innately anxious. It's good to have information from primary schools about children who are anxious or children who are diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. They will be anxious, definitely. So with or without a diagnosis of autism, people who are anxious are on the human being spectrum, and you need to display understanding and support to them if they have anxious behaviours. And it's also really effective to engage parents cooperatively in supporting the child with the 5 C's in school and at home. I really believe that schools can be places and need to be places of healing as well as learning. And in the school that I started, it was a therapeutic learning environment, and we did work closely together with the parents. I know it's more difficult in a large secondary school, but it can happen. You know, there can be organisational changes and changes to policy about supporting those who are anxious that would be very effective and would improve learning outcomes for the child. And ensuring the child understands what's expected of them. So if you've got an anxious child, whether they be on the autistic spectrum or just generally on the human being spectrum, it might be a good idea to take that child or a group of those sort of children aside and just really be clear and explicit about what is expected of them in school, and even give it to them written down. You might have given it before to the parents, but sometimes that personal one-to-one or one, to small group to go over those things really helps to get clear what's expected. And having a trusted adult assigned to them and a quiet place to go to support restoring calmness is also a big, big help. And schools can definitely do that. Also, please use subtle approaches to supporting children who are anxious or have a diagnosis of AS and are anxious because of that. They need not to be marked out as somebody different to their peers. They hate to be marked out as different, and it just doesn't work. So if you can be subtle in your approaches, that really can help a lot. So we talked about really listening. Here's an example of what's called active listening. So stay calm, use a neutral tone, reflect back what you hear, and give choices, and the choice is their responsibility. So here's a little example. I get you're sick of us going on about homework. Yeah, I'm sick of it. Why don't you shut up? You wish, so what you're saying is you wish we would shut up about it, is that right? Yeah, you don't. Sorry. Why don't you shut up about homework? Okay, I get that. What will happen though if you go to school and there's no homework to give in? Just think about how you will feel when you go to school without it. It's your choice. So there we are, there's the choice. You can choose to do your homework and feel good when you go to school, or you can choose to not do your homework, and how will you feel? Probably not very good. So think about that. The choice is their responsibility. And we talked about that in the previous module, that giving choices actually has an active effect on the brain and it encourages responsibility. And humour can be an effective diffuser of anger and tension. A bit of laughter, appropriate laughter, can help. Take care though with autistic spectrum people. There's humour and sarcasm and irony may not be understood for what it's meant to be. It may be taken as an insult, which will get the limbic brain and the amygdala going. So let's have a look about what's going on in your brain when you're an adolescent. And I think that it's really useful to teach young people how their brain works, just the basics, which is what we've been through about the rational brain and the emotional brain, and the connecting to your rational brain from your emotional brain, and also the role of the amygdala and how it can hijack your brain, close it off from the rational brain, and cause you to be fundamentally stupid. So in my school, we used to teach from 10 years old, we used to teach the children the fundamentals of how their brains worked. And it really did help them, not when they were in the middle of a really big upset, but as they were calming down, they knew what was happening. They knew they'd been stuck in their emotional brain, and it gave them some objectivity. I remember a boy being brought to me because he had done something that didn't work in class, and he sat in my office huffing and puffing, and I carried on with my work and just said, when you're calm, we'll talk. So in the end, he did calm down, and I acknowledged him and said, that was really good calming down, and I can see you've been brought to me because you obviously chose to do something that didn't work. Do you want to talk about it? And so he told me what it was. And I said, and when you were really upset, where were you in your brain? He said, I was stuck in my limbic brain and I couldn't get out. And I said, that's really good, being able to know and understand what was going on. So you can see it gives children some understanding, which allows for a greater objectivity. It demystifies the whole thing. And it takes the power out of the anger and gives back some rational control to their brain. So the language to use is, you were upset then, well done for calming down. What do you think was going on in your brain? And I've just told you the example of the boy saying he was stuck in his limbic brain and couldn't get out. So it helps with controlling intense feelings of upset. And it is a skill, and when it's achieved, it does deserve acknowledgement. Don't go, oh, why on earth did you do that? It doesn't, it's not good, and blah, 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 blah. And if you were rude to Miss So-and-so and upset, blah, all that's going to do is just get their emotional brain going again. So you need to acknowledge them for calming down, because all of us have been intensely upset from time to time. Some of you may not. I don't know, but I know I have been intensely upset. And when you calm down, it is an achievement. And if you can do it more quickly because you've learned about how your brain works, then it still needs acknowledgement because you're using what you've learned. So let's look at some case studies. A socially awkward adolescent without an AS diagnosis. I met a lady who came to one of my training sessions, and she came to me afterwards and she said, I realise now that my son did have autistic spectrum, and still does, but because we are a highly structured family, we had to be because there were a lot of us, his anxiety was diminished by the structure. He did okay at school, had a few social difficulties. He now has a job and a girlfriend. And so she realised, she said, that what saved him was the calm, consistent, clear home, family structure and clear communication. So it emphasises that, even if you don't get a diagnosis, if you have those features in your home, the need for structure at an early stage is essential, with or without an AS diagnosis. The importance of structure, commitment, clarity, consistency, calmness, choice, and no blame language. It was him, no, it was her. These factors are the gateway to supporting adolescents, whether they're anxious or non-compliant person or whatever it is you're dealing with, are autistic spectrum or not. It's a human being, right across the human being spectrum issue. Indulgence, inconsistent boundaries, and lack of structure create a lack of clarity and a lack of sense of security. So when early support systems and structures have not been available, we need to change the adolescent's environment to have more of the 5 C's. So you might find you have to introduce that into the life of an adolescent. And if you can get parents involved, all the better. And schools and parents need to work together with the same goals in mind to provide this committed, kind, calm, but tough, understanding and well-structured homeschool environment. If home and school can work together, it does make a huge difference to the child, really. I can't say how important that is. So in summary, we've looked at how adolescent brains operate, the differences in male and female presentations in adolescence, and the transition to secondary school, and how it can trigger the presentation of the more obvious autistic spectrum traits, what we can do to help, and how we can use the 5 C's of commitment, clarity, consistency, calmness and choice, and no blame language, like there's no right or wrong, there's only what works and what doesn't work. In my school, we didn't use the words bad, wrong, or naughty. There were the rules that worked in life, and you chose to keep the rules and have life work, or you chose not to keep the rules and life wouldn't work in the way you would like it to. And that was your choice in each occasion. So it is if you can possibly do it, really notice how often we as human beings use those right, wrong, blame sort of language and try and remove it if possible. So thank you for doing good listening, and I hope that you have found all that information helpful in your life, whether you're a teacher or parent. Thank you very much.